Now, on Monday, Sergeant Martin Blake was found not guilty of murder. He was accused of shooting dead Chris Cabba during a vehicle stop in London in 2022. Sergeant Blake said he feared for his and his colleague's life when he opened fire. And following the verdict, the National Police Chiefs Council called for changes in the law to help protect the police, to make it harder for officers to be found guilty for unlawful killing for actions taken while exercising their duty, and for their identities to be protected unless and until they're convicted. Well, in response, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, announced on Wednesday that the identities of armed police officers charged after opening fire at suspects are likely to stay secret in future unless they are found guilty. So today we're asking, do the police need greater protection from the law? Here to discuss that are Dr. Shola Moshogbamimu, a political and women's rights activist and author, Letus Bromovsky, a political commentator, Chris Daw KC, a criminal barrister and author, and Beryl St James, a pastor based in Croydon. Welcome to all of you. Chris, I want to start with you, and I think, you know, when we go back to the very foundations of policing, Sir Robert Peel, that famous quote about, you know, the police are the public are the police, and they should be held to account in exactly the same way. So with that in mind, surely we should be treating police officers and holding them to account as you would a member of the public.
Yes, we should be holding police officers to account in the way that we would a member of the public, but we also have to understand that the environment in which firearms officers in particular operate is one of unique danger, and also one of unique danger which is undertaken on our behalf. Very few people are shot by the police in Britain. It's only an average of 2.4 people are killed per year in the entire United Kingdom. In the last year, I think something like 18,000 deployments resulted in only 2 shots fired. So there are very, very few shots fired by police officers in this country. But when something happens, like, for example, the London Bridge attacks, which actually comprised 3 of the people who were killed by the police in 2017, when something like that happens, we need to have adequate numbers of firearms officers willing and able to go onto the streets and protect the rest of us from being shot or being killed in a terrorist incident or in an armed or otherwise dangerous incident. We have to have that protection, and unless we protect firearms officers from the sorts of experiences that Martin Blake has had, we'll be lucky to have any left.
So, Shola, it's about protection then, you know, in order to kind of feel safe on the streets, we need police officers to feel safe in the job that they're doing. Just to quote the chair of Greater Manchester Police Federation, Mike Peake, he said they need to buck the trend to find fault in police for everything they do is long overdue. Do you feel that there is too much scrutiny on the police?
Not enough scrutiny, in my opinion. And when we talk about giving greater protection, I think greater protection needs to go to the people that they're meant to protect and serve. Let's be clear here. The police has been found to be institutionally racist, institutionally misogynist, institutionally homophobic, and this has been happening for decades. And even from inception, you know, the way that the police acts with the public it's meant to serve has been called to question many times. In 2018, United Nations experts found that systemic racism was at the root of British society, and used police data to show the disproportionate killings of ethnic minorities at the hands of police. In 2021, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights published a damning report and taking the UK to task, saying that it has to deal with the impunity of human rights violations of black people at the hands of police officers in the context of policing deaths in custody. What I'm trying to say here is, I think that we are manufacturing consent by giving the police institution a blanket anonymity, which will lead as a stepping stone to blanket immunity. What should happen is, as and when the police officer requires anonymity, that particular police officer should apply to a court of law in his or her capacity as a defendant, and then there'll be opportunity for the plaintiff or the suspect to vigorously have that application looked at, and it will be for the court of law on a case-by-case basis to then determine whether or not that police officer should have anonymity.
I just want to pick up on Letus there, just on what Shola said about, you know, kind of heading towards this blanket immunity. Is that a concern?
No, I don't think it is a concern. You know, what Yvette Cooper has said is anonymity until they are convicted. If they are convicted and found guilty, that anonymity will be lifted. In so many judicial cases here, anonymity is given in cases where people are at threat to their lives from potentially criminal gangs. That was the case with Martin Blake in the Chris Kaba case. He has now gone into hiding. He's got this £10,000 bounty on his head because he wasn't given that anonymity. And I think that's where this case really shows that this has completely gone wrong.
Beryl, with that in mind, so if we have police officers then who are concerned effectively about getting in trouble, could it then have an impact on their decision-making? They're having to make those decisions under a huge amount of pressure.
It could do, but to give them further clearance, let me just give you some stats here. We've had 83 people shot since 1990. There have been 1,900 people who have died in custody or after contact with the police. The number of police officers that have been convicted for shooting, nil. What else do you need?
Do you not have any confidence in the system then, in the court system? So no one's been found guilty, despite the fact there have been 83 people who've been fatally shot by police in England and Wales, but no one found guilty.
Our justice system, particularly in the case of Chris Kaba, has served nobody. Exactly. Because, first of all, when we look at what's happened here, the police officers, yes, we need armed officers. And as a community leader who has gone out with the armed officers and has sat where they've got 13 seconds to make a decision, we cannot say, or we cannot look closely at it. They must be investigated. We need to look at the thinking that was going on in the officers, look at what's going on around them. To say that we are going to now give them anonymity when they've never been convicted anyway, I don't see how that makes any difference.
So I just want to get Chris, you know, because you work within the legal system, and your experience of this would be important here. And we have, you know, it's not just Beryl talking here. There are people who don't trust the system anymore because of this.
Yes, I think there's two different issues. There's the issues around deaths in custody and the issues around institutional racism in English policing. All of that is true. But what we're talking here is about something very specific, which is the momentary split-second decision that has to be made by a firearms officer on the ground, in the moment, facing danger, with colleagues facing danger. If we put in place a system, as sadly we've seen with the Blake case and a small number of other cases, where firearms officers in that split second have to consider, will I potentially be prosecuted for murder? Will I potentially spend 20 years in prison with sex offenders on Rule 43, which is what happens to police officers when they go to prison? With all of those pressures, in the end, I'm afraid, and I've spoken to firearms officers in the last few days on condition of anonymity, and they have told me, if we do not have greater protection, if we see more cases like the Blake case of officers conducting duties, which all firearms officers, and I've spoken to at least 4 who have said there was nothing wrong with that shooting, it was entirely within protocol, a jury, a multiracial jury, I think 4 non-white jurors on the jury, found him not guilty in a court of law. That tells you something.
Shola, I want you, Shola, to pick up on this, because you were shaking your head during that. So but is there an argument that they are damned if they do, damned if they don't?
No. I think it's important not to conflate good police officers with bad police officers, or police officers that have made an error of judgment based on whether it's prejudice, bias, or they just got it wrong. The reality here is, if there's a police officer that's more concerned about being prosecuted than doing his job right or her job right, that police officer has no business holding a firearm. So let me finish. The point is that the police are trained to disarm, to diffuse, right?
Not in an armed response situation.
With all due respect, if you're going to be holding firearms, you are intensively trained.
Yes,
the point here is that whether it's a 2-second or 13-second, they're meant to know, unarmed civilian, I've shot that person, I may be held accountable, but that is the job.
Okay, let us.
But I think it's quite misleading what we've seen so far portrayed through the media. Obviously, this happened in 2022, and then the reporting was done. There was so many restrictions on what could be, that this was a man going about his daily life, and you know, he was just a normal civilian. We now know from further evidence that that was not the case. And what Martin Blake knew at the time, as he was going after it, was this vehicle was involved in a shooting. So they were aware that the situation could have got out of control dramatically. Like you said, there is a very split second of time, and 2 further officers during the trial have testified that they were a mere seconds away from themselves firing off shots.
That's where your argument
that shows that the
down,
consensus...
Because Martin Blake knew exactly what we knew at the time he shot Chris Kaba, which is, one, it was a car they were going after, not the person. And he saw both hands on a steering wheel. He was not holding any firearm.
He was rewrite the trial.
He was using the car as a weapon, as a battering ram.
I am not rewriting the trial. I am
But that's
saying,
exactly what you're doing. You're suggesting that he'd done something wrong.
No, you are using the trial to justify blanket anonymity, and I'm saying, heck no.
Anonymity will kill conviction.
I don't want us to get into the details of this trial, obviously. This trial has concluded now. But
when you have a look at
go ahead,
the results, sorry, my apologies, but I'm getting a little bit agitated here. As we've never convicted an officer, what else do you, what more is there?
Yeah,
what do you think that?
They've never been convicted.
Yes, they've never been convicted because there's not been evidence of guilt, of a crime by those officers,
so
upon which a jury was prepared to return a guilty verdict.
Who was shot in her home, in front of her children, you don't think that there's evidence there for somebody to even be looked at for manslaughter?
Or that you're going to ignore the independent reports from places like the United Nations, or the fact, I mean, look at the recent case of Bianca Williams and her partner, who were, as far as we can see, they were wrongfully stopped and searched. The court found that to be the case only for the police, in their own independence, decided that no, they didn't do anything wrong. These people did the right, these police officers did the right thing, give them their jobs back. What the police wants is to be able to have this power. They want us to say yes to giving them the power. We've seen that the police does nothing but to abuse the power we've given them.
Is this what this comes down to then? Is this for you, this word of power? And do you know one thing we've not discussed yet, actually, and Chris, I'd love your thoughts on this, the idea of anonymity, because if it was you or I who's arrested and charged with murder, our name is out there.
Yes, it is, and that's the problem. So, Joe, this is why firearms policing is a unique function. It is the singular, most dangerous job to do as a police officer in this country. Every day you could be shot. Every day you could be rammed and injured or killed with a vehicle while someone's trying to make good an escape from an arrest situation. Those officers need anonymity because otherwise, and I've been told this by officers on the inside, they have been followed home from work already, even if they haven't shot someone. Gang members are aware of the identity of firearms officers. They are at direct personal risk if one of these cases comes into the public domain. Their families are at personal risk if their identity is in the public domain. And let's remember, this is officers who have done nothing wrong. They have absolutely followed protocol, followed their training, and they have killed someone in the course of duty, as they are sometimes sadly required to do.
I want you to respond to what Chris said. Chris is proving my point. When he says they've done nothing wrong, they're doing their job. That means their job is to disproportionately kill black and ethnic minorities.
Their job is to stop someone injuring other people.
Response to that,
no, that's what you're saying.
I'm just saying to you, well, where does the anonymity stop then? If you give it to the police, you've got to give it to other people.
No, you haven't, because the public interest is very different.
There are people like myself who can turn around and say to you, I've been followed by the very nature of what I do. I've been followed, people have threatened me, so if anything happens, why am I not afforded the same thing? We don't need the anonymity here because there is no evidence that says police officers have been discriminated against following a shooting.
I disagree.
Sorry, we do have to leave it there. We are out of time. It's always a fascinating debate. Thank you so much for coming on.